Welcome to Artistry Effects for Photoshop. In this tutorial, we'll look at how to use our Dreamscape effect for Photoshop. This effect is highly versatile with lots of options. Let's jump on into Photoshop and see how to use this effect. This effect is part of our Artistry Squared collection and comes in a square orientation template. It's also possible to crop and adjust this to be either a landscape or portrait template, and I'll show you how to do that at the end of this tutorial. For now, to use the template, there's nothing to install in Photoshop. All you have to do, once you've downloaded the template to your computer, it comes in zip format, you unzip the file, and you'll see the Dreamscape template. You just go into Photoshop and you go to File, Open, and open that template like you would any other image or file in Photoshop. So once you've done that, you'll have the template open like this. And to get your image into the template, all we have to do is move on over to the Layers palette here, and we're going to double click on the layer thumbnail of the top layer here. Not on the text itself, but right on the thumbnail. So we'll double click that, and that will open up a Smart Object layer in a new tab. And this is where we want to place our own image for this effect to work. So we do that by going to the menu File, and then Place Embedded. And then you just navigate to an image that you want to use with this effect. So I'm going to use this image right here, and I'm going to select it and then just click on Place. And Photoshop will bring this into the template for you, and then you can adjust by using the anchor points here to stretch your image to fill the template the way you would like it. Now for this effect in particular, I would recommend that you try to get your main subject as close to the bottom edge as possible. And I'm also going to bring this up a little bit to fill the template like that. I might even get down to the bottom edge a little closer, just like that. And I'm just going to move the subject into the middle of the template right here. And don't worry if there's any excess here, because we're going to extract the subject from the background. So to place the image, once you have the subject positioned where you would like the subject to be, click on the little checkbox here. And that places the image into the template. Now, there's one more step before we can run the effect, and that is we have to isolate the main subject from its background. So this is very easy to do in Photoshop CC. We can go up to the menu window and then scroll down to Contextual Taskbar, and that would open up this little bar at the bottom here. And all we have to do is click on Select Subject. And Photoshop automatically detects the main subject in the image, and it does a great job of that. So with the main subject selected, now we can click on the Layer Mask button right here in the Layers palette, and that masks the main subject and isolates it from its background. But we do have this default background here that we want to turn off. So we're going to turn off the visibility of this background, just like that. And for this effect, I'm going to go with that as it is right here. So to run the effect, all we have to do is close the Smart Object and save it. And to do that, we go to the little X on the Smart Object tab right here, click on the X to close it, and then click on Save to save it. And then Photoshop will work its magic and run the Dreamscape effect. Okay, and there we have our Dreamscape effect has come up with the default settings. Now in the Layers palette here, we have a lot of options to go through, and this effect is very versatile. I'm going to zoom in just a little bit on the image so that we can see what's going on here, and I'm going to hide the contextual taskbar for now, just to get it out of the way. Here we go. And let's start at the very top of the Layers palette here in the Optional Controls layer group. So first thing we'll do is we'll toggle that open, and inside there we have tone and texture, and we have color shift options. So let's dive into tone and texture first, and these are some standard options that we have here. So we have a vignette layer that we can add here, and this is very good to add for some subjects because it really draws the eye into the middle of the image itself here. So you can see the effect if we turn that on and off. Kind of pulls the viewer into the image a little bit more to have the vignette layer on. So we'll keep that on for now. We do have the option to add some grain, and this can add some uniformity to the image if you add grain here. It's very subtle, and you can adjust the strength of that by clicking on the layer to make it active, and then you can increase the opacity if you want more grain, and you can see how that affects the image right there. So for this image, I'm going to turn that off. We don't really need it to be a gritty or grungy looking image. Okay, and we can move down the list here. So we have the option to darken the image, and we can just activate that by clicking the visibility layer right there. This image actually looks okay with the darken turned on. We have the option to brighten the image as well. And then we have the option to add more contrast to the image. And for any of these are adjustable by double clicking on the adjustment layer icon, and you can make further changes to the adjustment layer if necessary. So I'm going to leave it on the default for now, but I'll keep the vignette layer turned on, and I'll close up the tone and texture layer group here. And then we can move into the next one, which is the color shift options. This is a really fun layer group to play with here, and I have a ton of different color shift options, 22 different custom color shift options for this effect. So we can just go through the list here, and we'll just go through a few of them. We have the option to add more vibrance, and it's very subtle on the tutorial, but when you try it on your own image, you'll see how that affects it. And you can also double click the adjustment layer icon to make further changes. So you can really crank it up, and you'll see the effect of that. Looks pretty good with more vibrance on this image. I like that. For some images, we want to reduce the color but not eliminate it completely. So we have subtle colors here, and we can activate that. And that brings it almost to a black and white, but not quite. There's still a little bit of tone here, still a little bit of tone in the background as well. So that can be very fun to play with for certain images as well. We have a color overlay, which allows you to just sort of give your image a color mood, and we can double click that color swatch and play with the different tones here to overlay different colors. So you can see how that instantly gives a completely different look than the default or not having it on at all. So that's a fun one to play with. I urge you to experiment with that one. Black and white is another great one for this effect, and I would always recommend for every image that you're working with to try it in black and white as well. It will surprise you, the results that you get sometimes. Look at that. That looks really, really cool in black and white as well as in color. Sometimes it's hard to pick which one to go with. And we have a few different sort of camera filters here. We have a sepia filter, we have a warming filter, cooling filter, a green filter. And then we dive into the color options here. And these are custom designed color options for you to play with here, and they just give specific toning to specific parts of the image, like the shadows and the highlights and the midtones, and these are all custom made for this effect. So you can play with those. There's a lot to go through there. So we'll close up the color shift options, and for now we'll just keep the default settings on, and then we can close up the optional controls group here. And we can go into the foreground elements. There's not a whole lot to play with here in the foreground elements. That would just be this kind of smoky overlay and this kind of faded in effect that we have at the bottom of the image right here. So really, this layer group would be a matter of just adjusting the opacity of the group itself. So we can close that up, and we can bring down the opacity or raise it right here. If we go back into that group and just see what's inside there, we do have the smoke overlay, which we can remove if you don't like the brightness of that, or you can decrease the brightness by just decreasing the opacity of that layer. And then we have a subject fade here as well. So that's a very subtle fade in on the subject at the bottom of the screen. Okay, so we'll close up the foreground elements there and we'll dive into the main subject. There's a couple of things you can play with here in the main subject group. So we'll open up this group and I'm going to zoom in so we can see the effect that we're having here. Okay, so our first layer in the main subject group is the sharpening layer. So if we click that to make it active, right now it's set at 75%, but we can deactivate the sharpening if it's a little too harsh. And you can see the image becomes much more smooth and softer. And reactivate the sharpening again. And of course you can adjust the opacity to really crank up the sharpening or to bring it down. Maybe you like the sharpening but not so much. We can bring it down to whatever percentage works well for your image. So for this image, I'll keep it back at the default 75%. So that's the sharpening layer that we can play with. Now we have two different layer groups here. We have subject toning and subject lighting. So for subject toning, this affects the sort of fine art sort of illustrated look that we're having here with the lighting. So we can, or sorry, with the toning, we can turn that off to see the effect. And that just adjusts the shadows and highlights of the image. So for some images, this is going to have a very dramatic effect by turning that on and off. And for others, like this one, it's going to be more subtle. We'll keep that on for now. And in the subject lighting group here, we have a number of different layers right here. Really, this group is meant to act as a whole. And you can see if we turn that on and off, this is where we get the kind of fine art lighting style. You can see the effect there. And if we toggle that open, the one layer that I would recommend you experiment with is the subject color layer. And if you double click on that, you can make adjustments to the toning of the main subject. And this would really be only applicable if you were wanting to adjust skin tones, I would say. So if the skin tone is too warm, you can bring that down to cool it like that, or you could go back up. And you can make other adjustments as well, and that affects the whole image, but mainly the primary goal here is to affect the main subject of the image that we're looking at. So again, if you like the sort of fine art lighting of your main subject right here, we can toggle that layer group closed. You can either turn it on or off, and you can also adjust the opacity of the group itself to make changes to your liking. Okay, and next down the list here, we have the main subject, the painterly look. So if I zoom in a little bit on the main subject here, if I turn the visibility of this off, it removes that type of fine art painted effect. And you'll see now it's more like a photograph. We go back out and see the whole thing. Can turn that on, turn that off. And again, this is going to have a dramatic effect on images where your main subject is a lot larger in the frame itself, like a face or nature, like an animal. And we'll see some examples of that in the sample page that we have on the website. So you can turn on and off the painterly look. Turning it on gives you the softer painted look, and turning it off gives a very sharp fine art photograph type of look rather than a fine art painting type of look. And that's the main subject group here. So we'll toggle that closed. And lastly, we can dive into the background controls. So let's zoom out on the image here so we can see the whole thing. And we'll go into the background controls. Now we have a number of fun things to play with, which is where we get the combinations of effects that are nearly limitless here. So we do have the bokeh effects, which you can see when we turn them on and off. There are 3 levels of bokeh effects. We have the smaller ones. We have the medium-sized ones as well. And of course we have the large ones. And you can adjust the opacity of these individually, or you can click on the bokeh effects layer group and you can adjust the opacity of that. So maybe you like those, but you want them to be a little more subtle. You can make adjustments like that. as well. Another thing you can do if you're feeling very adventurous, let's say you like the large bokeh, but you want it to be even larger. You can click on the layer right here, the large bokeh layer, or any of these, and you can click Command or Control T on your keyboard, and then you can zoom these to make them even bigger. So you can have a lot of fun playing with the bokeh effects as well. So that's pretty cool with the larger bokeh being even larger than the default. So leave that. Close up that layer group there. And we have a subject glow layer group. You don't really need to dive into the layer group here because there's only one. I put it in a group just to maintain the consistency of the look here. But the subject glow, if we turn that on and off, you'll see a glow around the main subject. And when we're toggling it on and off, it's quite pronounced. You can see it probably wasn't as noticeable when you first saw the image, but of course, when you're playing with it, it becomes very apparent how bright that is. And if you highlight that layer group, select it to make it active, you can reduce the opacity down a little bit. Let's go down a little bit for this one. I like that. And then we can dive into the smoke effects layer group here. We'll open that up and we have, there we go. Let's toggle that open. We have a number of different smoke effects. Some of them are turned on by default and some of them are turned off right here. So the first one that's turned on, I'll look at these two in a moment, is the subject smoke, and it's just smoke around the main subject. So that's the default setting for the default effect that we're looking at, but I will turn that off for now. And we can look at these other two options. Vertical smoke is like a vertical column of smoke. So it kind of conflicts with the subject smoke. If we have that on, might be a little bit too much. Or you can play with the opacities to blend them together if you like. And we also have a diagonal version of that as well. So the diagonal looks pretty cool with this one. And even if we take out the bokeh completely, looks pretty good with the smoke effects alone. Maybe turn it on the subject smoke as well, but reducing the opacity even lower. And we have a completely new effect here. This actually looks really good with this image. So we'll keep that on. We have surrounding the whole image itself, we have dark smoke and white smoke. So you'll see the effect by toggling those on and off. You can have a smoother sort of background if we turn those both off. There's the white smoke. There's just the dark smoke. And the two of them combined together. So have fun playing with these, play with the opacities of them, and just experiment with everything in here. We'll close that up. And next we have the default colorized background. So if we toggle that open right here, we have this background color overlay. And what this does is it takes a look at the main subject in the image, and then it gives us a complementary color overlay on the background. And the reason for doing that is it really helps to draw the eye into the image if the background is the complementary average color of the main subject. So we do have that overlay turned on by default, and we can toggle that off. And you can see the effect there. And then we do have a smoke overlay on the background itself as well. We can turn that on and off. And we have the background pattern, which is a pattern that mimics the shape of the main subject and some of the colors of the main subject as well. So you can see we're drawing some of the colors of the main subject outwards from the main subject. And then that's where the background color overlay can pull the eye in even more. Looks good. So we have this option to have the colorized background with the smoke overlay. If we want to turn that off completely, we can turn off the visibility of that. Now the smoke we're seeing here is not in the background. That's from the smoke effects layer group. We can turn that off completely and you'll see that's where we're getting that from. But if we turn off the colorized background, which has its own colorized smoke effect there, then we can play with the background color itself. So if we double click on the swatch, that brings up the color picker, and we can change the background color. So we're not affecting the main subject of the image. Those tones are staying the same, but we're changing the background color. And you can go brighter as well. So you can get pretty creative depending on the main subject in your image. Everyone is going to be a little different. You can have a lot of fun playing with these color effects. You can say okay to save that for now. And what we can do is we can even turn on the colorized background. I'm just closing up the layer group here. Turn on the colorized background, and you can see if we lower the opacity, actually you can see the effect it's had already with changing the background color. If I go back into that and change it back to the blue, you can see we're picking it up in parts of the image, usually around the edges as well. You can really have a lot of fun playing with this. So we'll click OK there. And for now, we can save that image the way it is. I'm going to turn off the vignette layer just for a moment here, because one of the things I wanted to demonstrate with this image is how we can make it a portrait orientation or a landscape orientation. So the thing I would recommend, once you've created the final image that you're happy with and all the tones and colors and options, go back to the top layer, which is the optional controls. Click that to make it active, and then hold down either Alt Control Shift E on a PC or Option Command Shift E on a Mac, and that will create a snapshot of your image. And the reason for doing this is now we have the option to crop it by going to the crop tool. Oops, crop tools here. And then we can bring that in and crop this image the way we like. Maybe a little wider there. Or another thing we can do is we can use Photoshop CC's generative functions, the AI functions. So if we want a portrait orientation, which is what we have here, we'll use the crop tool to do that. And then once you've made the crop, you can hit enter to apply that cropping to the image. Okay, if we want the landscape orientation, then what we're going to do is we're going to expand the canvas. So we'll go to Image, Canvas Size. And let's just expand it, let's say 7,000, twice the size. Okay, and we're getting a funny background here, and you may have noticed that Photoshop was re-rendering the effect. It won't change the actual image that we worked on, but adding extra canvas has added the extra background color that we've chosen here. But what we want to do is go to the marquee tool right here, and we're going to select an area inside the edges of the image. So we don't want to go to the full edge, which would be like the square edge right about here. We want to come in a little bit like that on both sides. So we'll make the selection like this. We want to make sure that our layer 1, our snapshot layer that we took, is active. So we're going to click that to make sure it's active. We have the selection marquee around the image itself, but it's inset a little bit from the edge. And now we're going to hit Controller Command Shift I to invert this selection. So now we're selecting the outer areas of the image, not the image itself. We're selecting the added canvas basically. And what we want to do now is open up that contextual taskbar again. And we can use Photoshop's generative fill to fill in these extra areas and give us a landscape orientation. So we'll use generative fill and just click generate. And Photoshop will look at the image that we have and will fill in those selected areas now based on the image that we've created. And Photoshop is going to give you 3 choices, and you can choose to see they're very subtly different. That one looks really good. Here was the original that it gave us. Here's the third one. So you just simply select this, and that adds extra background to your image. So you can move your main subject over to the side, or you don't have to go as wide as this. This might have been a little bit wider than a normal landscape image, but again, we can use the crop tool and we can bring that in sideways, something like that. And then we would have a landscape version of this particular effect. So that is our Dreamscape effect with the lots of versatile options to play with. I hope you have a lot of fun experimenting with this one. Thank you again for choosing Artistry Effects by Photography BB, and happy photoshopping.